Last time we talked about the colonization of Jamestown and the rest of the South. Today we're going to talk about the establishment of the New England colonies. New England consisted of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. In the establishment of New England, the Puritans were seeking to set up a utopia. That is to say, they wanted to establish a perfect society, a perfect balance between humans and with religion involved. So this utopian society was going to be an example for the rest of the world. So who were these Puritans? We need to understand that the Puritans, as their name almost gives it away what they were. The Puritans were a religious group from England. They opposed the Church of England, or the Anglican Church. They wanted to separate. That's why they are sometimes called separatists. The word Puritan comes from the word purify. And that's what they wanted to do to the Church of England. These Puritans believed that the Church of England was corrupt, it was rich, and interested in things that were far less than holy. They believed in different ideals than the Anglican Church. They believed in predestination. That is to say that God has already spoken for which souls were going to be saved. They believed in hard work and thrift. They were very fond of making money and also strict religious principles. Strict religious principles should guide all of life. They also believed in denying yourself of worldly pleasures. After all, you cannot practice religious principles if you're tied up in what's going on in the rest of the world. Now, these Puritans were very fond of running around in England and telling people that the religion that they believed in was wrong. They were very adverse to the king and were very outspoken. And they became very, very unpopular over in England. They were often discriminated against. It was difficult for them to find land to buy. It was difficult for them to find work to do because of their religious beliefs. And they, of course, were very unsatisfied with life in England. They'd even been kicked out and brought back several times through the course of the centuries. The Plymouth Company is going to offer a solution to both the Puritans and those in England who opposed the Puritans. The year was going to be 1620. In 1620, the Plymouth Company, again a joint stock company with the interest of establishing tobacco farms, much like had been already proven successful by the Virginia Company of London. The Plymouth Company is going to get together and decide to send some of the Puritans over to the New World on the Mayflower. The Mayflower is the name of the ship that the Puritans came to the Americas on. And again, the year is going to be 1620. This is going to be a win-win for both parties involved. The Plymouth Company needed hard workers to come over to establish this new colony, and the Puritans wanted to leave and set up a colony of their own. The Puritans came to establish this colony in order to escape religious persecution. We like to think that the Puritans were looking for freedom of religion, but that's not really the complete story. They only wanted freedom for themselves. They were not very excited about people who didn't believe the same way that they did. They, of course, felt that they had the perfect society, and they wanted to build a city upon a hill. That is to say, they wanted to have a city that would be the shining beacon, a light for everybody to see as their perfect society. They desired this utopian community, again with that perfect balance between brotherhood and dealing with the government through the church. Now these guys were also seeking economic opportunity, something that they had been denied back in Europe, especially in England. They were not given the chance to make a good life for themselves. And here the Plymouth Company offered them the solution. They could come to the New World and establish a new life, establish that city upon a hill, and they wouldn't be bothered. All they would have to do is work hard, grow tobacco, and be successful. That's when the Puritans became pilgrims. It is kind of difficult to understand the difference between these two words. A Puritan describes the religion. That is to say, their religious beliefs, who these people were. And there were Puritans who came to the New World, but there were also Puritans who stayed in England and throughout the rest of Europe. A pilgrim is somebody who goes on a religious journey. Much like you learned about people who take a pilgrimage to Mecca or a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. These Puritans became pilgrims when they came on this religious journey to the New World. Hopefully that clears up that term that we often use. Now, for the purposes of this class, these can be synonymous, but just understand that there is a slight difference. Once they arrived, they established what's called a covenant community. Now, the word covenant refers to an agreement, a way that we're going to live our lives. This is a word that is very biblical. It comes out of the Bible, and usually we think about the relationship between, or the covenant between the people and their God. Well, in this case, this is agreeing to have a community that's based on a covenant with God. They wrote down their principles in this thing called the Mayflower Compact. Now, the Mayflower Compact was signed aboard the Mayflower before they even got off the ship. The Mayflower Compact was an agreement on how they were going to run the colony. It was going to be based on democracy, and this becomes the first written plan for governing in the New World. This is going to be a very important document when it comes to the creation of the United States and our history. Now, this document was also heavily based on religious beliefs, and when we read the Mayflower Compact in class, you're going to see how much reference is made to their religious beliefs. Now, it also includes the notion that they will run their colony based on a direct democracy. This is a little bit different than the House of Burgesses, which had a representative democracy. In a direct democracy, they're going to run this through what we call town meetings. Everybody who is a member of the church, all the men who are members of the church and own property, are going to have an equal say in the government and be able to come together and make decisions for the entire colony. This picture, again, shows the signing of the Mayflower Compact, and there's something else that you should notice about this picture of the Mayflower. It shows us that women also came along. So unlike Jamestown, the Mayflower did have women on board. The Puritans did bring women with them, and that means that they are coming over here to stay. They are established family groups, and that's how they're going to set up their colonies. Now, life was difficult in New England. First, just the pure physical life that they had to face. When they arrived in Plymouth, the Puritans were, of course, first of all, late. They came over too late to plant crops, and they suffered a starving time that was very similar to that in Jamestown. Fortunately for the Puritans, the Indians were not quite hostile towards them yet, and several Indians stepped up, helped them out, and helped them survive that first winter. Then, after the following year, they were able to grow a round of crops and then sort of repay the Native Americans by offering them a Thanksgiving feast, thus the origin of the American Thanksgiving. Of course, as more and more Puritans showed up, the Indians became less and less tolerant of them, and the Puritans became less and less tolerant of the Indians, and eventually they were going to fight several rounds of wars with the Indians of New England. It was also socially difficult to live in New England because the Puritans were so intolerant of anybody who did not share their religion. While they came over seeking freedom from persecution for themselves, they were not afraid to persecute people of different beliefs. And that intolerance and the strict lifestyle caused many people to become what we call dissenters. Now, a dissenter is somebody who dissents or speaks out against something, and in this case, the dissenters were speaking out against the Puritan religion. They were often driven from the colony, sent out, and they had to migrate and leave and form different colonies, which we'll talk about here in a moment. Anytime we think about the establishment of New England, we want to associate the Puritans, who are also known as the Pilgrims, who came and established these colonies. But they were also colonies of dissenters of the Puritans, those who opposed the Puritan lifestyle. As I move to the map on the left, the first settlement was in Plymouth in 1620. After this proved to be successful, thousands and thousands more Puritans came and settled in Salem and Boston and established the Massachusetts Bay Colony. These two colonies combined to form Massachusetts, which is what we see on our typical colony maps. Afterwards, some people from Massachusetts decided it might be a little bit too crowded, and they began to migrate north, establishing the port city of Portsmouth, as well as several settlements along the Connecticut River. These people eventually founded the colony of New Hampshire, and they, like the Massachusetts Bay Colony, were strict Puritan believers. In 1636, some people left Massachusetts Bay and established these three towns along the Connecticut River, which was later given a charter to become a separate colony called Connecticut. The dissenters in Connecticut left Massachusetts Bay because they believed that there should be a separation of church and state. They did believe, however, in all the other teachings of Puritanism. So New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Connecticut stuck with their strict Puritan beliefs. The one exception is going to be Rhode Island. Also in 1636, at the same time that Connecticut was being founded, Roger Williams was forced from Massachusetts Bay because of his outspoken dissenting beliefs of the Puritans. He established the town of Providence, he and his followers. Later on, he was joined by Anne Hutchinson. And his colony of Rhode Island was a little bit different. This was one of the few places in New England where they did have religious toleration here in Rhode Island. They did have religious toleration and a separation of church and state. But these four colonies, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, become the New England colonies. You might be wondering about this area up in here. Well, as you can see, eventually this will be known as Maine, but at the time it was part of Massachusetts. Next time we'll discuss the founding of the Middle Colonies.